Wow, what an episode with our good friend Scott Turner. He went into three core needs to get into speculative building. First, you have to know your market.
Yeah.
Second, you need to know your numbers so that you know if you're going to win or lose on the job, right? Is it even a good job to take? And the third is lining up your money, right? It doesn't always have to be your money out of pocket. So if that is something that's interesting to you, you're wanting to get into speculative building, you may be a custom builder, remodeler, just even an investor, someone with a little side cheddar, go ahead and tune in. This is going to be an awesome episode for you to learn how to get into the speculative game. Let's get into it. Welcome to another episode of Builders, Budgets, and Beers. I'm your host, Reece Barnes, and we're welcomed with a very special guest of ours, Scott Turner down in Austin, Texas. Scott, give us a little background on yourself. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Reece. Good to see you. So appreciate the intro and the opportunity to talk to you guys today about, being a small infill home builder here in Austin, Texas. I started building infill housing, meaning, inside the city limits in existing neighborhoods. Back in like 2001, right? Back when lots here cost $85,000, and now that same lot today is $850,000.
Insane.
It's crazy. So we get a lot of complexity and so on, but in the end, it's a niche business, right? We can't scale up past a certain point because there just aren't that many lots available. And we don't want to take on that kind of risk either. So that's what we do, and we've done it here in Austin for a long time.
Love it. Cool. Love it. Well, and that's actually, with you being an infill builder, Scott, that's obviously what we're going to be focusing on today. Matt, go ahead and give us the rundown in terms of what we're going to be covering.
Scott, we've known each other for a few years now here. And I remember
this is worth noting.
Early on when Scott was teaching us about construction, he talked about, I used to do customs. Now I do specs. Customs are difficult. I'm a spec guy, right? So I think for those out there in the audience listening who maybe are doing custom builds, they're working with customers, maybe they're doing remodels, and are interested in getting into building more of an investment business, a spec development business, becoming a little bit more of a real estate developer, I think you'd be well positioned to talk to us about that. Why would you want to get into specs? How do you do it? How do you get the sell right, et cetera? So why don't you get us started?
Well, I'll start out by just sort of the basics, right? So again, because we build in the middle of town, there's lots of demand, right? People are looking for existing homes just as much as they are new. You go out to a new subdivision and you've got a bunch of custom builders with their shingles out, and people sort of go out there intentionally to buy a lot and build and go through the custom build process, right? So a spec is simply speculative construction. I buy a lot as a home builder, speculating that there's going to be a buyer there for that home once I'm done with it. And so I'm building it on my dime. I am my own client in that sense. And obviously, I think any custom builder would appreciate the opportunity to kind of be their own client, right? You don't have to deal with all the headaches and so on that come with custom homes. There are lots of benefits too, namely that it's not your dime, right? You're getting paid to build their house. That's not your house, right? Although certainly I think all the good home builders generally kind of take that approach of it is, I'm building it like it is my house. But yeah, so you're speculating that you're going to have a buyer after you build it. And so the reason that's attractive is obviously not just that it's efficient, right, in terms of not having to deal with a third party and so on, but also more profitable, right? If you are able to buy the lot at the right price and sell the home after you're done at a price that you expected to get, right? And just like we were talking about a minute ago with job costing, and you were able to control your costs well enough to hit that budget, then there is hopefully a profit margin in there that is greater than the one you make as a custom builder. And that's important because you're taking the risk, right? It's your house. If it doesn't sell, you still got to pay for it, you still got to make money. So there's risk there. And so most custom builders that I know, almost to a person will say, I'd love to do a spec, right? but I'm just not sure, how, or I don't want to take on the risk and so on. So I figured I'd just sort of break down, how that works, right? How to mitigate some of those risks as we've learned over the years through trial and error,
right?
And just sort of break down how the process works.
Yeah. So Scott, just so as a starting point, I mean, I guess you're in the shoes of a builder that's been doing custom builds for a while. You've heard about specs. You're intrigued. You touched on some of these points, but I guess as a starting point, why would you want to get into specs? Like making sure that makes sense, right? Because you touched on the point of, it might be more convenient for you as a spec builder because you don't have a client that has all these custom requests, and you have to constantly have these stops and starts in the project. You can just kind of build what you think the market wants and then sell it at the end. Mm-hmm. But obviously there's like a pretty fundamentally different business model being undertaken here, where you're switching from being a service provider to being an investor, right? You're effectively, you're becoming.
Let's do a little exercise here, Scott. Let's say my name is Reece Barnes and I just built an LLC, Bearded Builders, and I'm going to be getting into building speculative homes. What is step one for Reece at Bearded Builders?
So Reece, congratulations, right? You're now a builder. In Texas, that's about all it takes. We have no licensing requirements here. So Reece is a builder here in Austin, Texas, looking to do some specs, right? Well, first and foremost, it takes some element of market knowledge to succeed at it, right? You have to sell the house that you're going to build, right? So the most important thing I can say about doing a spec is you start with the sales price and work backwards to the land value that you can pay, after you take out all your costs and a reasonable profit margin, to see if you're going to buy that lot and do the project or not. So you have to know what you're doing. Stick with what you know. That's what we do. We build only in the middle of town. If someone says, "Hey, I really want to build a house out where people build custom homes," right? And we get approached by folks every now and then, but we just stick with what we know. If I have to drive an hour and a half to get to a job site and so on, sometimes it's a different regulatory environment. We work in a very complicated regulatory environment that we've become proficient at navigating. But some of the surrounding cities, it's much simpler to build a house, right? So wherever you build and whatever you're familiar with, even if it's customs, stick with what you know, because it helps manage that risk. You're a little more likely to know what somebody's willing to pay for that house if you're familiar with the area, right?
Okay. So first, I need to know my market. So I have my LLC. I might have been a little early thinking I'm going to build my LLC and go right into specs.
That's right.
But now that I know my market, what's step two?
All right. Step two is going to be, you can't just take your own word for it, right? You have to have a real estate agent as a part of the team. They don't necessarily have to be a part of Bearded Builders, but they definitely are a critical part of your success, because they are going to tell you and hopefully be responsible for the sale of that home that you're about to build, right? So you can't just take your own word for it. You do want to trust your own judgment in a lot of ways, but it's too much risk to just sort of decide you can sell that home for $2 million, right? So you need to consult with a realtor or two or three to really familiarize yourself. Go look at every property on the market, right? We love doing that as a company, right? It's kind of fun to go out and see some of the homes that are on the market. As builders, we always like picking apart the competition, and sometimes you get some good ideas. I think I still use a closet built-in design that I probably nicked from some builder 15 years ago on a preview. We all just thought that was a good idea, and we've done it ever since. So go out and look around, right? Use your eyes and ears, look at prices, look at what's selling. You get a good realtor advising you as well, because you really need to know what the product is that you're building and what you're going to sell it for, right? How big should it be? How small should it be? What kind of finish out, right? You have to look at your market to understand how much, because it's easy to over-improve, right? Just because you set a record high price per foot doesn't mean you made any money, right? House is beautiful, but doesn't mean you made any money, and that's a fail, right?
Right.
Similarly, if you don't spend enough on it, right, then you don't get what you thought you were going to sell it for, right?
Yeah.
So there's risk both ways, but it starts with just know your market. That's exactly right. So you get a good agent who's going to help guide you through the finishes and so on, and what you should be putting in there in terms of improvements. And you figure out, okay, this is about what I can sell it for. And again, you work backwards to, okay, now what can I pay for the lot? And there's a ratio here in Austin that is pretty consistent. Y'all might have heard this in the production world. Certainly lots of builders who have worked production understand this, but that sort of land to sales price ratio for production builders is about 5 to 1. And it has been for decades. When I first got into real estate 20 some odd years ago, the same ratio was still around, right?
Yeah.
So here in Austin, that's more like 3 to 1 as a floor. You don't want to pay more than about a third of your overall sales price in land.
Okay.
Ideally more like 4x, but that's a good rule of thumb.
And Scott, so knowing your market, I'll just tell you what I think that means if I'm what's it called, Reece? Beard builders?
Bearded builders, dude.
Bearded builders.
You're a partner in the
Bearded
company, dude.
builders.
You don't even remember the name of our company?
That name online right now.
Yeah,
exactly.
Bearded builders. Okay. So I'm working at Bearded Builders. I'm trying to make sure I know my market. When I think about knowing the market, what I'd probably want to know 3 things. And they'd all kind of come through the lens of like the supply and demand, right? So the first thing would be overall Austin. Do I think like people moving to Austin is going to grow faster than new houses available for them, right? So like overall market level knowledge, that'd be step 1. So if I'm picking a city, I want to know whether I think there's a lot of people moving there, right? That's the demand. And then the supply. What do the current houses look like? And then the second thing I'd probably want to know is within Austin, where are those dynamics the most favorable? Meaning, which neighborhoods will people most want to move to? And in those neighborhoods, is there the lowest amount of supply? That'd be so like overall city, neighborhood. And then the third thing is kind of what you're talking about. It's like you're going one level deeper. So this is Austin's good. This is the best neighborhood. Specifically within that neighborhood, what type of houses are the most in demand and the least in supply, right? So like houses with 3 bedrooms and a pool, right? There's not many of those, and there's a lot of families that want them. That's probably like my summary of know your market. Do you think there's anything that I'm missing there?
No, I think that's a good general overview, but I think from a builder's standpoint, certainly it's rare that a builder would be looking at it from that investor's eye view, where you would be coming into a new market. That's so you're generally correct. But
Dr. Dollar just can't help himself over here.
Well, this is actually, I think this illustrates the point of what we were saying earlier.
Yeah.
Different businesses, right? Where one is kind of being an investor, one is offering a service, which is that we do construction, we build for others. So I do think, you maybe you don't necessarily need to understand this in depth, but it's something you should be aware of. I think if you're going to switch your business model to becoming an investor.
Yeah, because you can do a spec home out in a neighborhood full of custom homes, right? Builders do them all the time, right? You can do a spec home in a neighborhood full of existing homes that were built in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, right? Very different markets, right? With very different products, but similar risk levels. And you need to know those markets if you're going to build in them. I think that's really my point there. Yeah. You did a good job of sort of an overview of what you might gauge in terms of that. But I'll hone in on one thing, which is demand. That's really what you're trying to say is where is the hot market, right? If you talk to realtors, they'll kind of know like, oh, this neighborhood's heating up, and so we track, micro markets or sub markets, they're almost, block by block sometimes, because there's differences, right? You go north of a big road, that's a different market than south of a big road sometimes, Streets are pretty big geographic barriers, at least they're perceived that way sometimes. So again, just spend the time to know your market, because that's where a lot of the risk is. And you can take a lot of that out by just understanding what you should be doing relative to what's going on.
Okay. So step 1, know your market. What's next, Scott?
All right. So now how's the process works? Well, you found a neighborhood that meets those criteria, right? And you know what homes are selling for, and now you got to work backwards, right? So you say, okay, I'm going to sell my house for $1 million, and again, that ratio I gave a minute ago, 3 to 1. So your lot should cost somewhere around $330,000, give or take, right? You got to back out cost of sale, right? And you got to pay that realtor, right? Because everybody is looking for an existing home. They want that home today. Nobody goes looking for a to-be built in the middle of Austin, right? If that home were built, they would buy it today, right? Not 6 months from now, not 9 months from now. So you got a cost of sale in there that's probably 7%, 6% for realtors and 1% for title insurance and closing costs and so on. And then you've got your hard cost of construction, which as a builder you should know what that is, right? And again, do a detailed budget. You've got soft costs, right? Which is sort of everything else, much of which is typically paid for by the customer in terms of custom homes, right? You've got architectural fees, you've got cost of financing, which you don't pay as a custom builder, obviously. If you've got impact fees for, meters, utilities, things like that, you've got a budget for all those. And then last but not least, you've got a budget for things like interest, right? Because you're going to be paying interest on that loan as you build the house, and you have to make sure that interest count. Property taxes, same thing. Texas is a pretty high property tax state, so that's a material number in a pro forma. And so you do the math. Pro forma is just simply the spreadsheet that calculates all these things and gives you a number at the bottom there.
There's Dr. Dollar right there.
Yep. We got the old Dr. Dollar 2.0 coming
and
in.
So that's a good tie-in. We'll get to banking here in a minute, but that pro forma is just what it's called, right? Those are your numbers, right? That can be the back of an envelope, right? You just sort of write it out and so on. But I found that the better builders will take the time to make that pro forma a little more detailed, because you're better able to tell what these expenses really are. And it may not matter in the big picture whether your taxes are calculated accurately or your interest is a little off. Does that mean you're going to fail? No, it doesn't, right? But what it does help with is, if you do it a lot, it might be the difference between saying yes or no, right? You've got to have some sort of a decision-making point around your numbers. And if your numbers are accurate, well, it's a little easier for me to accurately say yes or no.
Well, and getting to that yes or no, you made a comment earlier, Scott, about like how lucrative a spec builder can be as opposed to like a custom home builder, right? And when you are running these pro formas and you are looking at all of the numbers and you're being more calculated, that's all margin, right? Like if you start to slip on any one of those lines, like you're potentially chewing through costs that you didn't assume, and that's going to be taking away from the upside, which is why you take the risk.
That's right. That money's coming out of your pocket. That's not a change order, right? That's just loss, right? That's a great way to put it. If you don't budget correctly, or you have overages during construction, that's a loss, not a change order, right? There's no cost plus in the world of spec construction, right? You can't pass it on to anybody but yourself. So that risk, that's really a risk, right? So that's why doing a good budget is important, right? You work backwards to your hard costs, your soft costs, and so on, and cost of sale, and then your land is the remainder, right? And then hopefully there is enough margin left to make it worthwhile, right? And I would say, historically speaking, and this might vary from market to market, but probably not by much, the profit margin as a percentage, right? So a percentage of your sales price, right? Percentage of revenue is traditionally in the mid-teens at best, So on the low end, it's probably, 10, 12%. I don't know that anybody should ever do a single digit spec project, out of the gate. That's too risky, right? But it, and obviously sometimes you get a good deal on your land, you buy it right, and that helps your return, right? Sometimes if you pick the right neighborhood, the market increases in the neighborhood and you get a little bonus on the sales side. But typically it's in the teens, right? And there's some reasons for that I'll get into, but it's not this giant margin that everybody thinks it is, right? It's not 30%, 40%, 50%.
Right.
Sometimes those margins are achievable, but they're generally if you also develop, right? If you're also buying a property and entitling it, changing the zoning, subdividing, things like that adds more value, right? And has more risk, by the way. So
sure.
we'll get into that some other time. But that's sort of where if you get into this, you start looking at like, oh, maybe I could get a few more units here and there.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah, that's level 2. We can come pay you back on the podcast.
That's right.
Changes. The thing that I'm sure a lot of people listening, they haven't done specs before, and you're talking about all this, like you got to know your market, you got to like run the pro forma, all this stuff, and then you end up in the mid-teens on profit margin when custom builds are often targeting that. Why would I want to do a spec then?
That's a good question, because I left out an important factor there, which is out of that mid-teens, you got to pay all your general administrative expenses, right? There's still overhead. That's not net margin, right? That's just your gross margin on the project,
Yeah.
And then you're paying for your insurance, your office expense, all that, and management too, right? Also goes into that gross margin. So I guess what I'm really trying to say here is I don't know that specs are some kind of home run every time you try one, right? But you need to know what costs are allocated where, and that's important. But
Sure.
in general, you should be able to absorb those costs, including management, and make enough money to make it worthwhile, right? And accept that risk, right? So that's what we did. We would just buy a lot in a neighborhood that was, going from sort of bad to a little better, and and just bought another one on the street. There were lots of vacant lots around, and so we just buy one and build on it, and slowly prices started to increase, like I said, over time. And now that same neighborhood is extremely expensive, and those homes are $3 million plus on those 800.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. That's for your listeners out there. That's a 12% annualized return a year for 20 years, right? Going from 85,000 to 850,000 in 20 years is a 12% annualized return just for holding on to the dirt, nothing else, right?
Yeah. Insane.
That's why Austin has a housing shortage, right? In the numbers, but regardless,
But Scott, so that I think that point is important though, because our listener probably hasn't done specs before; they're deciding whether they actually want to do this. It seems like you're saying the profit margins are roughly similar. So, like again, I guess, what do you think from your perspective is the reason to get into specs? I have some ideas based on what you've said, but I'm curious.
One, I would say it takes the pressure off in terms of having to find jobs, right? Every custom builder that I know, including myself, although I don't necessarily have a lot of horror stories, thankfully, because we do a lot of specs, and it lets us pick and choose our custom clients, right? Yep. So that's a benefit, is it kind of gives you a little bit of diversification. There's a little efficiency by having a little more volume going. And you don't have to take that job just because you need it, right? You get a little control over that because everybody's got a client that they're like, man, I wish I never built that house, right? Mm-hmm. It turned out to be way more work than my fee. And usually you make more than the fee. I'll say that typically you would make more than just a typical builder fee on a custom build, or it wouldn't be worth it, and there's upside, right? Again, if you're in a neighborhood that increases and appreciates, then you get a little bonus for that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I feel like we're taking the journey. Like, specs are interesting, specs are less interesting, specs are maybe interesting again here. We got more money. So the thing you said takes the pressure off of having to find jobs. So, right, you don't need to find customers. Presumably that does lower your overhead because you're not paying for marketing or sales or whatever in your business on that side. You don't have to have staff to manage change orders or selections and stuff like that. So lower overhead there as well. So generally just like a more streamlined, you can run with like a smaller overhead load, and you can basically find your own jobs. And then I think the other piece you said on there's upside is the key piece as well, where if you really know your market and you're bullish on your market, buying now and you expect prices are going to rise, you're going to benefit from that. So the margin
it takes you a year to build, right? In Austin, it takes about 18 months from start to finish, about 6 months for permit, buying the land, getting it permitted, and so on, and then about used to be, I'd say, about 9 months to build, but now it's about a year, right? So, but overall, it takes about 18 months or so to go through the cycle. And if you're appreciating 5% during that time, that's all margin, right?
I'm sitting here wondering, why even do customs? Why not do spec? Obviously, there's a risk component to this, but I mean, like, knowing your numbers, knowing your market. I mean, a lot of the listeners out here, they're grew up in the town, stayed in the town, been in the town for 10, 15, 20 years, building. They're in that community. They know realtors. Like, why wouldn't you just run specs? Like, what, I mean, to cover yourself with a customer, right? And that income, right? As opposed to all being yours and you like taking the bet. But I'm sitting here, I'm like, run a pro forma, know your market, work with experts in the industry, right? It almost sounds too easy. What am I missing?
Well, I mean, what you're missing is the middle part, right? Is the financing, right? How are you going to buy that lot and then take out a construction loan and build it, right? Because hey, if you can do that all with cash that you have made as a custom builder, right? Then Reece, you're probably right. If you can pay cash for it, you probably should be doing a spec here and there, right? You've done well. Right. You don't want to take every dime you own and put it into that spec. That's for damn sure. That's too much risk. but that is the risk, right? That's the risk is, hey, it's your dime and you have to be able to qualify to buy that land, right? You usually take out a land loan. You've got to qualify for the construction loan. And even though you might know how to build a house backwards and forwards, the bank is not qualifying you based on how well you swing a hammer, right?
Right.
They're
Okay.
qualifying you on your ability to repay, right?
There we go. Okay.
Banks are evaluating the borrower, right? Yes, they look at the property, but they don't care how good of a deal you got on that lot, right? You should care, but the bank doesn't really, right? Because none of that value has been realized yet. You have to build it in order to see those profits, right? They're looking at the borrower and the borrower's financing, right, and their ability to repay. And I think that speaks to really one of the strengths of Adaptive in the sense of it is a better way for builders to get a handle on their finances, right? So I'll give I'll call it a general overview of kind of what that means when I say quality, based on a borrower's ability to repay. So essentially, banks are looking at a couple of things, right? There's equity, right? You got to have some skin in the game, right? And you got to put a down payment down. Usually lot loans are 25% down, or 75% loan to cost, or LTC is kind of the common metric, right? So you're doing a 60 to 75% loan to cost, just depending on your qualifications as a borrower, right? And then you're taking out a construction loan that has a similar loan to cost ratio of 60 to 75%. It's rarely over that with banks, and then you have to be able to qualify to make those interest payments during construction, right?
Sure.
So they need to see some liquidity and so on, so that they know that they're going to get paid, and you're not going to miss a payment here and there while you're spending all your money trying to build a house. So as a part of that, banks have to look at your financials, right? They're going to need to see your company tax returns, right? Usually 2, 3, 4 years, just depends. They're going to, and I know us particularly custom builders, right? You're going to try and deduct everything you can, right, to lower that tax bill, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes your tax returns, and again, banks are used to looking at tax returns. They understand our business, but nonetheless, you do have to have the income to be able to justify buying that lot, right? And you also have to have the cash to put down to meet those loan to cost requirements, and that's equity. That's called equity. So the cash you put down is the equity, and that equity can be yours as a home builder. Again, caution everyone listening not to put their eggs in one basket, right? And take every penny they have and put a down payment on a lot, right?
OPM is important. OPM.
Right. That's right. So,
you don't know what OPM is, Matt? Come on, dude. It's other people's money.
Oh,
dude.
there we go.
OPM.
Yeah.
Dude, I thought you were a Wall Street guy. Don't you know this?
No.
Equity investors, right, are folks who are going to contribute some of that equity, right, in return for some share of the profits, right? And and I'm going to say just construction terms, that sometimes that guy is called the money guy, right? So you got a money partner, right? You got a money guy,
the original
Dr. Dollar.
and you got a builder, right? And it takes two, right, in order to get that deal done. But it's risky for the money guy because they're the one putting up, the lion's share of the cash, and they're relying on you as a builder to actually build it and keep costs under control. And there's risk there for them too, right? And that's why they would expect a bigger return, right? They're going to expect a little bit more than 10% on their money, because that's too risky for that kind of return, right? I think right now you can buy a bond with zero risk for 4 or 5%, right? So those returns tend to be north of 20% in terms of a return on your capital. Equity and capital are kind of interchangeable terms here, but yeah, you'd expect that equity to be earning north of 20% in order to take the risk, right?
Yeah, sure.
So you got to pay your equity, some kind of return out of the profits, and that could be profit share. There's different ways to do it, but nonetheless, you got to pay for the privilege to use other people's money to help you build a spec home, but you still got to qualify for the note, right? You still got to qualify for the financing. And my banker years ago, when I got my first spec loan, I had done 3 prior using a private construction lender. And when I went in to see him, I was young and I just said, well, I don't know if I can qualify. And so he goes, Scott, how many specs have you done? And I said, well, I've done 3 and this is my 4th. And he said, that's great because we're bankers. We're not venture capitalists. We're not investing in startups, right? And my point here is that first one is the hardest, right? Because banks want to see a track record or they want to see a lot of qualifications, right?
Right.
And it's going to be your name on the note, right? You will definitely be a guarantor on that note personally, even if Bearded Builders LLC is the borrower. Reece Barnes is going to be beholden to the bank for that note, and that can be stressful, right? You have to understand what that risk is and be okay with it, or you shouldn't do it, But there is recourse. That's called recourse in banking. It's a recourse loan. And they are ubiquitous in spec financing. I've never done a loan that I haven't been a guarantor of. So you've got to qualify, and to do that, you've got to provide your financials, right? Your P&L and balance sheet, and that's where builders usually trip up the most. If you talk to bankers, that's the one. And the banks that like to do spec loans for builders are the small banks, community banks, right? Don't go to Wells Fargo, Bank of America, right? The big banks just really, it's not worth the trouble, right? To do a spec loan for a builder. The community banks really know their communities better, in my experience, right? So find the small banks. They're the ones who really are actively looking for builders to lend to, and that you want to develop a relationship with. So you ask around other builders, find banks that lend to builders for this kind of thing, and then you got to put your financials together. And really, that's sometimes the hard part, right? Speaking of job costing earlier, right? If you have a real accurate P&L, you know what you made on that house, right? And on the last one and the one before that. Balance sheet. Now we're getting into accounting here, but this is important, right? So there's P&L, right? How much did I make, right? Everybody has to know that to be in business. But there's another aspect to financial accounting, and that's called a balance sheet, right? That's how much you're worth, so to speak. How much your company worth? How much cash do you have on hand? How much equity has been invested in the business or the project, right? How much debt you have? All that is on the balance sheet. It doesn't show up on your P&L. It's on your balance sheet. And those two things together are kind of your financial snapshot at any given time, right? So you're going to need to provide accurate balance sheets and accurate P&Ls to your banker, and that involves accounting principles that frankly aren't terribly difficult to understand. It's that nobody, as builders, nobody ever walks you through it, right? You're out there building and counting nails and so on, and trying to track your costs as best you can, but it's not that complicated. And frankly, most bankers would be glad to explain it to their borrowers, right? There's no, you could be a very successful builder and made lots of money and not know your way around a balance sheet, right?
Yeah.
You can learn. So that's important, is to essentially know where your money's going and know which bucket it belongs in, right? And that makes the banking approvals much easier, right? Your tax returns kind of have to jive with your books, and that involves some balance sheet reporting and so on. It's good to have a CPA. In general, you don't have to have one, but it's good to have a CPA who kind of understands your business. It helps. They can give you good advice and save you lots of money, both in taxes and just in general accounting. So I've had the same accountant my entire life, or entire professional life, I guess.
Relationships.
That's right. That's right. But they're really an integral part of the business, and that's important because you do a lot more banking when you're running specs than you do when you're doing a custom.
Totally.
And again, you're the borrower, so you got to put together your business financials, right? You got to bring some equity to the table, right? Set up an LLC. We'll get to that later on in terms of how to do it, but it's good to set up an LLC specifically for the project for liability reasons. But you've also got to do what's called a personal financial statement, right, or PFS, right?
Okay.
And that's important. And the reason I mentioned it is, one, you need to know that you're going to need to do that if you're going to go ask for a spec loan, right?
Yeah.
And that is kind of like your personal balance sheet and P&L. So go ahead, Reece. Go ahead.
Okay, so if I'm the listener here, this is my digest, is if I don't have strong financials, personally, business-wise, that really is like step one, right? Because if I just march in there and I'm like, I've been doing custom homes for this many years and blah, 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 and they peel open a P&L and they're like, none of this makes any sense. There's no way any of this is accurate. There's no way we're going to get in front of you with this. Am I out on specs?
I mean, I would say yes and no. One, I would say go in and ask, right? Start to learn this stuff now.
Sure.
Because even if you're not ready today, you know what you're going to need to do, right? I wasn't ready the first time I, did my first spec, much less when I got my first bank loan.
Right.
It turns out I was more ready than I thought I was, but I certainly didn't have a bunch of money and so on at the time. So it takes less than you would think, as long as you understand your finances, right? And so go in and learn, and then take that time. If you're not ready now, okay, what do I need to do? Right? That's the question you want to ask your banker: is what do I need to do to get to this point? And they'll tell you.
Yeah.
Well, and so doesn't that, I mean, like you mentioned like risk like earlier on, right? And like being comfortable with that risk and who you are. I think like risk is risk, and it's some people take advantage of it, some people don't. Some of it impacts others, some of it impacts them differently. But doesn't that kind of say a lot about your risk tolerance? Is your risk tolerance is higher the more calculated you are, the more organized you are, like the more detail oriented you are. So if you did even just start going in and you were like, I'm a custom home builder, I think I want to take on this risk. Do you think there's a correlation there between like having strong financials and not, or do you think that's just too wild?
I don't know. I think you've got to be. It's a balance in terms of understanding the risk, right? Because it's more risky than you think. And again, like you said, it's usually other people's money too, right? And you've got a responsibility there that's important. I'll say, in fact, that's one of the best things you can do is take care of your investors. If you make good money for your investors and you do what you say you're going to do, even if the project doesn't do as well as you thought it was going to, I mean, they don't all work out the way you hope, but nonetheless, that's really important because that relationship will last, over many years. I have the same financial partners that I've had for 15 years,
Wow.
For the most part. And
why would they leave? Right? You're making them money.
Very happy. They're very happy. I'm very happy with them. It's a good relationship. And again, that's really where it's at. So you want to build those relationships with your banker and with your capital partners. And that sometimes takes time, right? If I can't do it today, what do I need to do? Kind of like buying a house, right? If I can't afford to buy a house today, what do I need to do in order to be in a position to buy a house? Same analogy, right? Only this is a house you're building, not just buying, but it's very similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah, Scott, I'm thinking almost as we've gone through this podcast that we could do deeper dives on each of these. It seems like there's 3 things you need to do to get into specs, right? You got to know your market, you got to know your numbers so you can figure out how much to pay for the lot, and then you got to have investors. So I almost think we could do deeper dives on each of these topics. The one piece that I would like you to talk a little bit more about now, though, on finding your investors is we've talked a lot about bank requirements, right, and what they expect. You mentioned the down payment required, and it could be from you out of your own cash, or you could find your money guy. How did you find your money guy, right? How did you find how do people find their money guy or money girl, right? How do people find their first equity investors?
So I have a good story about my money guy and how I met him, which is by chance, right? So it's by chance. That's how I met my money guy.
No, Scott, we got to revise this. There has to be a formula here. We got to.
Yeah, there has to be a formula.
I can tell you why. I'm a big believer in sort of you make your own luck, right? And you see an opportunity, right? Opportunities come your way if you look for them, right? And so I built a spec home, in a neighborhood just south of downtown. House was on the market for $650,000, and I got a call on the weekend from somebody saying, "Oh, my wife and I are driving up from San Antonio, and we want to see this house, right?" And I said, "Sure, I'll go over there and show it to you." And again, I've been a real estate agent and broker for longer than I've been a home builder, so I sold my own listings. Again, market knowledge. That's if I was going to say what's the secret sauce for success for specs, it's market knowledge, right?
Yes.
So I went over to show it to them, and they pull up in a little old Toyota Corolla, right? Not new at all. Get out, walking through the house. Oh, it's not quite what what we're looking for. We're moving from San Antonio, and I tell him, I'm also the builder, and so he says, well, hey, we'd consider building. Hey, if we want to look around for a lot, we consider that too. But we like living in the middle of town. And so I said, great, and so I started to look around for some lots and finally found one. It was a pretty big lot. We're in a neighborhood called Zilker, again, just south of downtown,
Mhm.
and went over and looked at it. And he said, well, it doesn't quite work for us, but hey, would you consider, building on it? So he propositioned me, right? Hey, if you consider building on it, would you look at it like a project? And again, I had a spec going, so he knew I was in that business. And I said, okay, and I was just doing it with my own money at the time. And I said, okay. And I did my due diligence, and it wasn't a good project, right? We said no, you know.
Mhm.
But I said, okay, okay, is it okay if I look for another one and maybe we can find one to do, right? And sure enough, we found another one to do, in a similar neighborhood to the first house where we met. And that was the first deal we did together. It was right before the Great Recession. I don't think I
Dang.
made any money on that project, to be honest with you. So our first project was not a home run, by any standard. But we got along well, and one thing led to another, and then as sort of luck or fate would have it, in the end, we ended up doing probably the largest project I've ever done, which was 18 total units on
Dang.
several acres over in Zilker. And it turns out that property was the same property that we had under contract all those years ago. It's probably a decade prior, that we ended up developing it
No
out. We bought the
way.
surrounding tracts. We ended up developing it out together, like 10 years later, and did really well on it. So you just never know. But I'll say this, having been in sales myself, never judge. My moral of that story is you just never know when the opportunity is going to come up. But certainly never judge a book by the cover. If someone, I know lots of realtors who probably would have dismissed that couple as not being worth the time of day, whether they wanted to see a spec or not. Turns out he's been a fantastic friend and financial partner for many, many years, and still is to this day.
Totally.
So I just say, just keep your eyes open, but also you can ask around, right? There are folks out there who look for investments like this, right? There's private lenders. That's the other ones you can go to. That's where I went. I knew an investor who was very good. He's probably the savviest real estate investor I've ever met, and he financed my first 2 or 3 homes, right? And I had met him as a part of my real estate practice, and that got me started. Now I had to pay a higher interest rate. Those guys are also called hard money lenders. You might have heard that term. They charge more interest because they are taking the risk. They are investing in the project, not in your ability to repay. Again, banks are investing in you as the borrower, and private lenders are investing in the project, right?
Yeah.
They expect they're going to have to take it back if you don't succeed.
Yeah. Okay. I think this was an amazing overview of specs, like intro course of specs. We should probably do follow-up episodes where we dive
Totally.
deeper into each of these segments. I think the last piece for you to touch on to wrap it up, it's like, okay, these 3 things: know your market, know your numbers, right? So you can know how much to pay for the lot, and then have the money ready, have investors that can help you buy it. Those 3 things together allow you to act fast, which I remember working with you early on is really important, right? In a hot market like Austin, Texas, or a good opportunity arises, it's not going to be around for long. So the ability to kind of act fast. If you could talk about how those 3 things allow you to then go ahead and act fast on the lot and buy it, I think that'd be a good way to kind of wrap up the episode.
That's a great question. So how do you put yourself in a position to act quickly and find and buy that deal, right?
Yes.
Particularly if you're competing with several other Scott Turners out there, all of whom are eagerly trying to find the next lot to build on, right? In a hot market. One, you got to do your homework, right? Again, understand your market first, right? It is extremely difficult to run around looking for money when you found the property, right? That is hard, right? And full of risk in a number of ways, right? It's too fast, you're not prepared, and so on, right? So the more prep you do, the more knowledge you have, less risk you bake in, right? So don't wait for the deal to show up. Look around, find one. Even if you know you're not going to buy it, act like you are, right? Run the numbers, go through the process, talk to people, right? Really do your homework. That's the best piece of advice I can give somebody is to go out and look at their market, understand it, start to, hey, be intentional about it. I want to do this. I need to talk to a banker. I need to find a bank that I want to work with and wants to work with me, and develop those relationships, because when it happens, it is going to happen fast, right? Particularly if it's a good price on that land.
Yeah. Yeah. So Reece, now you know what to do for Bearded Builders. What are you going to do?
Yeah, we've already, we're already getting ready to run our due diligence. We already have our pro formas put together, and we're already starting to talk to banks. I got a couple meetings lined up during the podcast. So I appreciate this, Scott. We're going to be a very successful business over here.
Mm-hmm.
But no, to Matt's point, I think you could go deep on this. And I think just even having that 3-step process, right? Know your market, have your money.
Know your market, know your you got to
know your numbers.
What
numbers. The most important
you
part.
Summarize with a real project, like Scott said, is like, okay, I like investing in Austin, specifically in Zilker. I'm looking for a lot that can support a 3-bedroom home in Zilker. I know it's going to cost $800,000 all in. I want to make $100,000 of profit. I can pay $100,000 for the lot. I'm ready once a lot comes available at that price. And I've already cleared it with my money guys and gals, and we're going to be ready to go. That's what you got going on at Bearded Builders.
Yeah,
that's right. I got money guys in the background. They do the money stuff.
And frankly, that's probably the hardest part for most folks, right? Is finding the money, right?
Yeah.
But again, I think get out in the neighborhoods, talk to realtors, et cetera. Really, just try to network around that, and it'll happen, right? And again, it just takes getting started and kind of get one going. And if you get in and out of that, I like to advise people, and we've even done that. We've built customs for somebody who wanted to get into the spec business. We're like, well, let us just build for you, and you can experience it and then decide. Right. And it went well enough because now that same guy runs a very successful custom home building company here in town, and he started hiring us. We gave him a taste of it, and he took it and ran with it. Great guy, Adam Mosier.
Yeah.
Who? Adam Mosier. Yeah. Sounds familiar.
Yeah. But so I would just say the first one, it's really, don't expect to make it a home run.
Right.
If you can get in and out of your first spec project and make some money, or at least have paid yourself something reasonable, that's a win, right? Because you're learning as you go, right? It's the second one and the third one and the fourth one where you can really focus on, hey, I'm getting better at this. My margins are improving. I learned from that one not to do this and not to do that. And, I put in that expensive whatever it is, and maybe I didn't need to spend that money and still sell it. So you learn as you go, and your margins improve as you go. But that all comes down to just knowing your numbers.
Knowing your numbers.
Cool.
This is a great episode, Scott. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. I foresee deep dive podcasts coming up here shortly.
Glad to help any way I can, guys. Always great to see you.
Great to see you too, Scott.
All right. Take care, Scott.
Thanks. Y'all take care.